My father died when he was about 83, and he had the last 2 years of his life, he was not mentally normal. He began to lose his acuity a few years before that. My mother died 2 years before him, and so he was being taken care of in a lovely care facility in Southern California, right near where he'd lived for most of his adult life, much of his adult life. And he just lay down one day and didn't want to get up. And so the people who were taking care of him called my sister and my brother and I, and we knew that it was perfectly in the course of things that he should pass, and we just asked them to just let him be. And so we went down there, and the three of us pretty much sat with him for the next maybe 48 hours. He was not particularly attuned to this path, but we put Swamiji's voice chanting Om, that Om tape, just very quietly, and kept it running in the room the whole time, because it's the right affirmation for a person passing. And I've sat with a number of people when they've died, and I recognize the shifting in breath that indicates that the person is really trying to leave. And when I saw that coming, my sister wasn't there, I called her, and the three of us sat there, and he breathed out a few more times. And then in a long, shuddering breath, that is what happens when the soul exits, he left. It's very amazing to see how all of life culminates like this. He'd had the ordinary life. He was born in New York City. He was a brilliant child. He was skipped many grades in school. He was in college by the time he was 15. And he went into the army. He fell in love with my mother. All of us came along. He struggled to meet our needs, everything. My mother grew ill, just the whole drama, the regular drama. And then the body just gets stranger and stranger. It's not really pretty when the body's getting finished. Death is beautiful, but not physically. You know, the face shrinks in and all these strange things. But when that breath went out of him, and he went off wherever he went, somehow I was right with him. Energy just went up my spine like that, and I was so joyful. And the joy lasted for many days. He'd done it. He came, he did what he had to do, he did it nobly, he did it as well as he could. He wasn't a great saint by any stretch of the imagination, but he was a good man. He did what he came to do. And what he came to do was about, in the great scale of history, was about this big. He bought a home, he took care of his wife, he was a little disappointed in his children. 3 out of 3 he lost from the point of view of having anything to really brag about. My sister did better than my brother and I for bragging rights, but there you are. But he did it. He did what the task was in front of him, and I felt the Spirit say to him, well done, well done. Now, I contemplate the life of Christ, and we see this extraordinary power. The life assignment of Jesus the Christ was a whole lot bigger than the life assignment of the man who was my father. All these, centuries later, all over the world, people are celebrating the magnitude of what he did, not the least of which was to face into what the human mind would perceive as so terrible, to do what he had to do with courage, and then to laugh it off at the end with his resurrection. Even life itself, death itself, it meant nothing to him. And the challenge of the life of Jesus is, on one hand, I was so happy all day yesterday, and I kept realizing I was so happy because Jesus was about to be resurrected. And of course, he was resurrected a long time ago, but there was just this feeling of glorious anticipation, because we knew Mary Magdalene would run to the tomb and it would be empty and she would be afraid, but then Jesus would appear. Wow, what a story. It's like better than the home team winning, really, a lot. But there's also this challenge that is offered by the life of Christ. We like Christmas better. He's a little baby, He's just right there. We have all the angels, the children dress up, and it's just so sweet. But in this one, especially with all the dramatizations, he bleeds, he suffers, he grieves, the women scream, everybody is just terrified, not the least of whom are us, especially those of us who are self-realizationists and realize this isn't just something we can be deeply grateful for. Phew, he did it for all of us. Instead, what we're looking at is we are literally looking at our own destiny. In the Festival of Light every week, we talk about the great sacrifice of the masters to come into the world and to give everything for the salvation of mankind. And then the next sentence is, here then is the fourth and last stage of the soul's long journey, every soul's long journey, which is that we must, each one of us, reach that same point of absolute selfless transcendence. And this is why a lot of us don't really like coming to church. We don't like to be reminded. Swamiji said many of those who came to Master to be his disciples didn't stay, because what he presented to them in the most kindly and loving manner was nonetheless their own destiny, that power is required. There's the story of the disciple upon whom Master was urging some difficult task. And the disciple said, "Oh, Master, how can I do it without your blessings?" And Swamiji says whenever he tells that story in India, everyone goes, "Oh, what a beautiful answer," like that. But Master did not accept that as the answer. He said, "My blessings are there. God's blessings are there. It's your blessings that are lacking. It's your commitment to this high ideal, your belief in your own reality to become that which we are destined to become." Just a moment. But when I think about my father and the life that he lived, and even some of you have heard me say toward the end of his life, I was urging upon him some courageous embracing of the potential of this opportunity to learn new things. And he was resisting me, and I was persevering. And finally, in exasperation, I said, "Don't you want to grow?" And he looked at me and said, "No, no." And just, I realized he just had enough. He'd gone as far as he could go. But still, in that final moment, there was that expansive joy. Now, here's the point that I'm trying to make on this. We have to understand the degree to which God is our friend in our spiritual journey. The song that we sing, "You Remain Our Friend," which we sing at the end, in the middle of our Festival of Light every week, that was Swamiji's attempt to explain the crucifixion. In the oratorio, that's how Swamiji writes about Jesus dying on the cross. "You remain our friend. When we need you, you descend. Our grieving hearts, your love alone can mend." Now we have this paradox of tremendous challenge and at the same time, the comfort of our very best friend. I was watching the last public program that Swami Kriyananda gave. Tomorrow, as most of you know, is the anniversary of the first year of his passing. And it wasn't this close to Easter last year, but it was very close. And the last public program he gave was an Easter Sunday service that he gave in Assisi. And he gave it in Italian, but they've put English subtitles under it, so if you can easily find it on the internet if you like. But there's at one point where Swamiji is sitting in front of the packed temple in Assisi, and when he sort of sits down and opens his eyes, the first thing he says is, after meditating, he says, "My, there's a lot of you here," like this. And you can see that the temple is as full as it could be. And then later on, when he's giving the service, he looks out at the room like this and talks about how he loves every one of us, how much he loves every one of us, and how he would like to take all of us with him into the bliss that he's feeling in his heart. I started trying to think about that. He didn't even know the names of many of the people who were there. Many people were seeing him for the first time. What was it that he loved? We think about loving, I know you, I like you, you're a friend of mine, you behave nicely, you sing well, you make a good impression, I get to know you and then I love you. Swamiji's looking at a room of people, half of whom he doesn't know or has never spoken to, and yet he offers out to them a greater, and as many people experience it, a more personally touching kind of love than they ever meet in any other circumstance. And Swamiji also on that same occasion had written us a letter last year, and he talked about his desire to go on. It was really a goodbye letter. His desire to go on, and the only thing he regretted was having to leave all of us behind. But then he comments, and he says essentially, I'm really tired, or I'm not at all interested in your egos and your desires and your worldliness, all of the little things that we hold so dear and that we want to talk about and we think who we are. He says it's your souls, your divine self. Now, when any master looks at us, they don't see the struggles. They don't see what we think of as ourselves. My father saying, answering the question, do you want to grow? No. That's the worldliness, that's the ego, that's the desires. What the divine sees in us, what Jesus sees in us, and all the masters see, is they see that perfect reflection of the Spirit. And their lives give us a unique kind of hope. And this is why we're drawn to the masters, why when you read the Bible, something happens to you. When you read the Gita, when you read the Rubaiyat, you feel something in there. You feel this awakening hope. And it's not the hope that I won't have to go through what I have to go through, but that somehow, in the end, it won't matter at all. And that's exactly what the life of Jesus presents to us. It isn't as if all those terrible challenges didn't happen. He did. He was crucified. He was arrested. He was scorned. His disciples were totally frightened. We have those 3 days in there. We don't talk about what they were doing. Can you imagine what was going on in the minds of those disciples? How could they understand? Of course, in the end, it didn't matter. And so often in our own lives, we have to simply walk through very, very difficult circumstances. We become disappointed. We become ill. We become bankrupt. We end up solitary. We become deeply depressed. It's like we've tried so hard. I remember Swamiji, he lived in the dome at Ananda Village. You've now seen it in Crystal Hermitage. It's the living room of his house. If you've seen the Finding Happiness movie, it's in the center there. For a long time, it was the only house he had. Now there's a complete roof built over it. Before there wasn't. And the thing leaked like a sieve. When it rained so heavily into the house that there was a trap door that we used to store wood underneath. We would literally lift the trap door and sweep the water out. Like with a broom, just push the water and it would roll down the stairs. And we tried to fix it in 100 ways. And Swamiji, mimicking the attitude that so many people have sometimes, he said, we're so sincere. We're so deeply sincere in our desire to stop the water from coming in, and the water doesn't seem to care. We tell him how nice we are and how good we are and how we want it to be easier, and the water just finds the leaks and just runs right through. And so in our lives, we think, can't I just be spared a little? Can't I just have it easier just in these small ways? God knows I've tried. I'm so sincere. But we're not finished, that's all. And when the masters look at us, they really are not impressed. They're not impressed by our desires and our disappointments and our tears and our failures. They're just not impressed, that's all. I remember once I was distressed about something that was happening, and I was just sobbing and upset, and I was sitting in Swami's house. It turned out, he told me later, it was a critical turning point in my spiritual life, that if I didn't have the courage to face into what I was facing and didn't want to face, he actually said, he announced it to the entire community a few days later, she would have left the path. But at the time, I was trying to get Swamiji to be sympathetic. I was having such a hard time, and I wanted him to be sympathetic. And I'm sort of crying over there, and I become aware of the fact that he's not listening to me anymore. Now, it gets worse, much worse. In those days, we had very little electricity, we had no lights anywhere, and we had very little money, and your flashlight and your batteries were really important. And when your batteries would get low on your flashlights, you didn't want to quite throw them away, so you kind of just put them off to the side. So I knew, because I helped keep his house, there was a drawer of half-used batteries and a little tester to find out which ones were worthwhile. I'm having a life crisis over here. Swami has opened that drawer, and he's testing the batteries. Now, I mean, this is a job you do when there is nothing else worthwhile going on. You don't ever do this in an important moment. I'm collapsing in despair over my own cross. And he's indicating to me, what can I do for you? Sooner or later, you're just going to have to pick it up and do it. I was remembering this. Once at the school here, I saw Craig with one of the little preschoolers, and the little boy had tripped and scraped himself up, and Craig had cleaned him up, and then they were walking together, and the kid was just barely big enough to reach up to Craig's strong body, and they're walking along together, and Craig just, as a matter of fact, just says to the boy, walk it off, walk it off. You know, that's what coaches say to the athletes, walk it off, just walk it off. And I really, on a very deep level, I loved that. Nobody ever spoke to me like that, being a girl, and I never played sports. But I realized that's exactly right. Just walk it off. Just, what are you going to do instead? As one of my friends put it so beautifully, it's not that easy to lay down and die. You get hungry, you begin to itch. You know, it's just not that easy to do. And even if you have the unfortunate karma to actually end your own life, which people do sometimes one way or another by drinking themselves to death or whatever they do, you still eventually have to finish. You just have to finish. And you see, what you finish in is glory. And that's what the life of Jesus is all about. Mary ran to the tomb on the first day of the week, and there the tomb was empty. I mean, what? And just, does this never end, is what she's thinking. First, Judas, who was one of their very own, suddenly is siding with the people bringing them to take Jesus away. Peter wants to stand up and defend Jesus. I mean, it's like, here's my master, and these evil people are taking him. Give me the opportunity to fight back. So Peter pulls out his sword, and he's ready. I mean, these are armed men. He's ready. He's going to give his life and count it well spent. And Jesus says, no, that's not what's being asked of you. You're not going to just be able to beat against the walls and use your physical force to make this happen. It's going to be much worse than that. And Jesus has already told Peter, when Peter was speaking with great bravado at the Last Supper, that he would do anything that Jesus wanted. He would go anywhere. He would give his life. And Jesus looks at Peter and says, oh, and then says 3 times, before the cock crows, you will say you don't even know me. I mean, this is in front of all the other disciples. What can Peter say? I mean, this is a prophecy. He has no comprehension of what's coming. And so then, at the moment, he wants to keep his word. Jesus says, no, you can't do that. Now, Peter did have the nerve to follow Jesus when Jesus was arrested, when he was taken before the judge, the court, the Jewish court, to see if he was guilty or not guilty. Peter slipped in. I mean, there was none of the other disciples around, but Peter slipped in. But when they began to identify him as one of Jesus' followers, he just didn't have the courage. It's easy to think, oh, I could have done it, but he didn't know. Would he have been seized? Would he have been taken? Would he have been tried in that moment? And you can see all the conflicting energies. He pulls out a sword, but now he can't speak. And 3 times, just as Jesus said, when he was asked, no, I don't have anything to do with this man. And then after the 3rd time, he hears the sound of the rooster signaling the dawn. And now Peter's just completely overwrought, and he runs away. The next thing, Jesus is dead. He's been crucified. Days passed. I mean, you think our little problems are tough. This is a big situation. So Peter's last experience with Jesus is that he pretended, here he is. His Lord is in trouble, and he doesn't even have the nerve to say, I'm one of his. And Jesus is now gone. These are hard lessons. These are hard things to walk through. Now, then Mary Magdalene goes first. She's going to get that body. She's going to make it ready. She's at least going to honor him that way. And he's gone. They've not only killed him, they've stolen his body, which was not an unreasonable thing to have had happen, because there were stories that he would resurrect. So if they disappear the body, then maybe it'll be settled. But instead, she comes out, and Jesus is standing there. And at first, she doesn't even recognize him. She's so anxious and overwrought. But then she sees him. Everything, all that she's been through, every bit of it, all the struggles of her life, being lost and then being saved by him, all the suffering that she went through before she met him, all of the incarnations that led up to that. And all of a sudden, you see, he's conquered it all. He's just made a mockery of all suffering. He's just shown himself to be so far above it like that. So she runs and tells the other disciples, who don't believe her, of course. They run back, 2 of them run back, it goes on and on. Finally, the disciples are all together. And there is Jesus in the midst of them. Peace be unto you, he says. Peace, the final ending of all of the dramas. Now, how do we really walk in the shoes of Jesus? I mean, who of us is going to volunteer to be arrested and crucified? Who's going to say, I'll do that, that's the one I'll do? No, God is more subtle than that and really sweeter. He just lets us make the life that is exactly the same size as our courage, exactly the same size as our capacity. Well, that's not true. A little bigger. But it's just shaped just like us. But because I'm thinking of my parents, when I watched them go through the last years of their life, I kept trying to reform their karma so it looked more like mine. This is what I would do if I were you in that situation. I would handle it like this, which interference was not welcomed, as you can well imagine. And I finally realized, if God is with me, if God and Guru and the great masters are holding my hand and taking me step by step, he's holding the hand of my parents. He's holding the hand of every single one of us. Swami looks at a whole room of people he doesn't even know. And you can see it in his eyes and hear it in his voice, and speaks of how much he loves all of us and how deeply he longs to draw us all into the bliss he's experiencing. Jesus stands and looks at the city of Jerusalem, and he weeps. Oh, I would help all of you. I would have gathered you, he said, like a hen gathers her chicks under her wings. All of the images of God are always the images of the Comforter. And that's what Jesus himself says to his disciples. I'm going away. I've helped you as much as I can help you here. But after I'm gone, I'll send you the Comforter. The Comforter is the Om vibration. It's the experience of Divine Mother's comforting presence surrounding us and telling us, yes, this is difficult, but I will walk with you. In this deeply held, almost impossible to imagine tenderness, the way Divine Mother holds us. The most exaggerated longing of your heart to be loved and comforted doesn't begin. Master calls it beyond imagination of expectancy. And it takes a dramatic story. We imagine that what Jesus had to face was so difficult, but it wasn't difficult for him. It was simply and exactly who he was. He was there to serve everyone, and the joy of his life was in doing so. And his destiny was the same size as his consciousness, which is to say infinite. And our destiny gradually expands to that infinity, step by step, lifetime by lifetime. I watch my dear father, whose life was so humble in so many ways, and he was always just trying to find a way to make it work. He was never really, really bold about the way he approached it, but he was just going to make it work. But at the end, you could just feel Divine Mother had wrapped him in an aura of completion, and in the last moments was just comforting him. And so then when he was done, he could just let it go, and that bliss was there. Jesus on the cross, it's different in magnitude. The masters are different in magnitude, but not in their essential nature. Jesus is being crucified, and then it's done. And he says, it is finished. And then in that moment, again, just like my father, the breath went out and it was done. And so for each of us, we just have these little dramas we're going to play out. Your life, my life, today, tomorrow, a year from now. We just take one little step at a time. And Divine Mother draws us like this. You can do it, my child, you can do it. But I'm afraid. That's all right, you can be afraid. Just one little step at a time. Just keep moving forward until we have reached that final freedom. God bless you.